looks like people are getting connected. Welcome everybody. Thanks for joining us for this month's Community of Practice. We're really excited to be talking with Katie Cox and Sheri Newton from the Disability Law Center. I am going to put a couple of links in the chat to our project website. And yeah, I'll just hand it over to Eduardo to get us started. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Mindy. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Eduardo Ortiz, and I work at the Institute for Disability Research, Policy and Practice, IDRPP, at Utah State University. And together with my colleague, Mindy Docos, who is in charge of all the technical and logistic coordination, would like to welcome all of you to another community of practice organized by the Multicultural Disability Network and Training Multinet project that seeks better understanding of the challenges faced by people with disabilities from multicultural backgrounds. The intersectionality of disability and diversity multicultural factors such as race and ethnicity, age, geography such as rural frontier settings, gender and gender identification, socioeconomic status, including health literacy and family structures, among other cultural elements that creates complex contexts that need expanded conversations and learning opportunities such as this community of practice activity. As part of Multi-Network, we have developed other products I invite you to look at the link placed in the chat. Today, we have the privilege to have Katie Cox and Sheri Newton from the Disability Law Center, the DLC, who will present about accessing justice using collaboration to deploy legal knowledge and resources to new communities. Katie Cox is a staff attorney at the Utah Medical Legal Partnership Coordinator at the Disability Law Center. Katie Cox is a 2019 graduate of the University of Utah's College of Law. Katie also holds a Master of Social Work with a concentration in Organization and Community Social Work practice from the University of New England and a Bachelor of Arts in English Creative Writing from Seattle University. Katie began working at the DLC as a law clerk in June 2017 and transitioned into a staff attorney role after law school. She practices law as a healing profession, combining her law and the Master in Social Work Education to be a client-centered humanistic practitioner, engaging in the work from both an individual and systemic perspective. She is motivated by a commitment to community building, civil and human rights, and access, and is passionate about social, economic, reproductive, and disability justice, human dignity, and whole health. Sheri Newton is an advocate at the Disability Law Center. Sheri considers it a privilege to have worked for 30 years as a legal advocate for people with disabilities, with 25 years at Utah Disability Law Center. Acting as the PAVA program coordinator, she has enjoyed educating voters, poll workers, and election administrators across Utah's beautiful landscape. Most notably, she is pleased to have secure accommodations and improvements at vote centers and ballot boxes statewide. A rural resident herself, Sheri leads the DLC Rural Outreach and Education efforts. Most recently, Sheri began working collaboratively with new partners to expand voting access within the Navajo Nation. I would like to remind some ground rules for this community of practice as well. We would appreciate if you introduce briefly in the chat, writing your name, location, organization you represent, and your role. Remember, this community of practice group is here to discuss, not to debate or argue. Also, any discussion should be focused and avoid side-deviated conversation. Keep an open mind and be open to learning something new. Avoid making assumptions. Be respectful of others. Listening is as important as talking. Ask questions to gain understanding and clarity. Please keep your mic muted during the presentation, and also remind you that this community of practice is recorded. Katie and Sheri, the stage is yours, and thank you for being here.
Thanks so much for having us. We're excited to speak with you all today about a couple aspects of our work at the Disability Law Center. So I am Katie, and I am a staff attorney. I am going to talk just a little bit about the Disability Law Center in general, because I think that sort of placing our work in sort of a foundation is important, because we do a lot at the DLC, and Sheri and I are just going to talk about a couple of the components today. So I will begin there. So the Disability Law Center is what's called a protection and advocacy agency. So the PNA system is a nationwide system of agencies mandated and empowered by federal law to protect and enforce the civil rights of people with disabilities. There's a PNA in every US state and territory, so we are Utah's PNA. We serve individuals with any kind of disability, including but not limited to intellectual, emotional, sensory, and physical disabilities. So every state and territory has a PNA, and the governor of that territory or state sort of indicates who the PNA is. So we are the PNA designated by our governor in the state of Utah. We advocate for people's rights to live and receive services in the most integrated way. PNAs were really created when the deinstitutionalization movement was just beginning, when exposés and things were happening, when what we were seeing in institutions and how folks with disabilities were being treated. That's when Congress sort of started the PNA work. So that's a really important and continues to be a really important core part of the work that we do in every way. So we are a private nonprofit organization. As I said, we're designated by the governor as Utah's PNA. So we're ultimately a law firm. We're a legal-based disability rights agency. We have many components of our work that are focused around the law, but aren't necessarily provided by attorneys. So we have advocates and other kinds of staff members who are providing all kinds of supports and work to folks with disabilities in the community. We provide services statewide, and those services are free of charge if folks meet case criteria. In general, our mission is to advance and enforce the legal rights, choices, and opportunities of Utahns with disabilities. And we envision a just society where Utahns with disabilities are free from stigma, discrimination, and abuse, where they have the authority to make their own decisions and the same rights and opportunities as those without disabilities, where their voices are heard, which inspires discussion and motivates change. Utahns with disabilities have equitable access to supports and resources needed to be as independent as possible and full participants in their communities. And that's really what drives our work every single day. And we love it. This is us, a few of us, not quite all of us, but most of us, when at one of our staff meetings last year. And then just a quick look here at areas in which we do work. So service priorities you'll see on the left: accessibility, assistive technology, civil rights, community living, education, employment, healthcare, fair housing, transportation, voting rights, and then the teams through which we do that work: abuse and neglect, access and rights, community integration, education, employment, fair housing, public policy, representative payee audits, and short-term assistance. I'm gonna now turn, so that's just like super quick overview of what we do. I could talk for hours about our work, but I won't, because we only have you for a short time today. So I'm gonna talk a little bit about work that I engage in for a good bulk of my time, which is called the Utah Medical Legal Partnership. This is something that we started the end of 2019. And so I'm going to sort of talk about what that work looks like, the structure of what we do and why we do it. Ultimately, a medical legal partnership can look like a lot of things. Different organizations and communities have different partnerships that are structured in different ways, or that they provide outreach in different ways. Ultimately, though, a medical legal partnership is a collaboration between community health centers and nonprofit providers of civil legal assistance. Our goal here is to disrupt the cycle of returning people to unhealthy conditions by addressing the social and environmental factors that negatively impact their well-being. So we work with patients of Utah community health centers who are experiencing what we call, and it's a mouthful, health harming civil legal needs. But that's ultimately really what we're talking about here. So that are sort of caused by the social and environmental factors that are happening in their lives. So we create relationships with healthcare providers, and then we can connect patients / clients with legal assistance, as well as opportunities to cross-train between medical and legal providers. So I'll talk a little bit about, break that down a little, what that looks like. So the Disability Law Center is part of an organization called And Justice for All. So we share a building, we share fundraising efforts with under our And Justice for All umbrella. And the two other organizations that are a part of that are Utah Legal Services and Legal Aid Society of Salt Lake. So as we're all separate organizations, but we share a mission and a goal, right? We share this idea of helping people in Utah receive justice, protecting their well-being, overcoming poverty. And so we do that by offering free legal representation and programs. And so through the partnership, what we've done is we've figured out a way for our three organizations, so our three legal organizations, to then partner with community health centers. So community health centers who are primarily serving uninsured or low-income folks, and really get at folks who are really falling in the access to justice gap. So we have 4 community health center partners right now. The first is Utah Partners for Health. They're a federally qualified health center in Midvale, Utah, so Salt Lake Valley. Then Family Healthcare, they're a federally qualified health center in Southwest Utah. So they have, and they offer a patient-centered medical home. So that is in, they cover both Iron and Washington counties. Then we partner with People's Health Clinic. They're a nonprofit clinic in Summit and Wasatch counties. They do not take federal funding, but they are funded by local dollars. And then Flourish Therapy is our newest partner. And they are a nonprofit clinical care program providing counseling services and short and long-term therapy and crisis intervention to individuals and families in the LGBTQIA+ community. So it's a pretty, and they cover, their services go statewide. So this is sort of the picture of the partnership here, and we're continuing to grow and think about how we can continue to expand into other space. So we started the partnership in late December 2019, right before the pandemic. Great time to launch a project, let me tell you. And so, but we worked through all of those kinks, and we've continued to be providing services. So we signed our first memorandum of understanding with our first community health center in December 2019, our second in November 2021, our third in January 2022, and our fourth just this past March. We have received 223 referrals. So these numbers are as of our last reporting period, almost a month ago, not quite. So I'll have new numbers coming out soon. So we've received 223 referrals to the partnership since we began in January 2020. 116 of those have received external referrals, fact sheets, other resources, warm handoffs to resources in the community. And 83 of those have met case criteria within our 3 organizations, and we've been able to take their case and assist them with their legal issue. And then we have some ongoing ones, because you're probably doing the math and that doesn't add up to 223. But we have some that are in the works. Some interesting things here. Through these referrals, 36% of total referrals are non-native English speakers. These are primarily Spanish as well as Portuguese. When we look at our standard numbers that we see coming through our intake, like our general centralized intake at the DLC, that number of non-native English language speakers usually looks somewhere around 10 to 15%. And so we can see that there is a really substantial difference, right? We're reaching folks in a community that we wouldn't otherwise be reaching. And we think there's a few reasons for that, and I'll talk some more about that. So ultimately, the folks we're talking about, patients of Utah Community Health Centers are those are low income or uninsured, as I mentioned, Often the first language is not English. Often they're members of underserved ethnic or geographic communities. These patients are experiencing what we call health harming civil legal needs that are being caused by those environmental and social factors, and they don't know where to go to solve the problem. For healthcare providers and patients, often they don't know that there's an underlying legal issue, right? Something is going on, but they don't necessarily know that there might be a legal solution to that problem, right? That legal issue is ultimately what is negatively impacting their well-being and their health. And so by sort of creating these partnerships, by figuring out how to collaborate with healthcare providers, we can really provide access to legal services to those vulnerable patient clients. We can remove barriers to health by really getting at those legal risks, right? Because what we're talking about here is health disparities. We're talking about social determinants of health. We're talking about the way that people's lives sort of go on every day. And we know that there are things that are happening, right, underneath that are causing the conditions in which people are living. And so this sort of creates this pipeline where we can get at some of these issues, and we can do that through the legal aid process. And then that improves the access to justice. So I'm going to give a couple examples here. So when we talk about social determinants of health, we're talking about, so we're looking at the World Health Organization definition, the conditions in which people are born, grow, work, live, age, right? The things that are occurring in someone's environment in their life. These are the circumstances that are shaped by economic and social policies, by political systems, by social norms, and they contribute significantly to health disparities. So, for example, one social determinant of health might be that someone lives in a food desert, right? So they live in a place where they do not have access to healthy, fresh food, right? They either need to engage some kind of transportation system or a resource or something else, right, to get to that healthy food. And then when we think about what a social need is a more immediate individual need that patients might enter a health center every day needing because of those social determinants of health. So that social need is, we need healthy, fresh produce today to keep our family fed and healthy, right? And then a legal need is sort of the subset of social need that only has a legal solution, right? That can't be solved in some other way. So a solution to a social need, like a family's need for fresh produce today, might look like, well, what are programs available, right? Is that look like, what is the barrier? Is that transportation? And are we looking at like a bus pass? Or are we looking at some other kind of transportation? Is that SNAP benefits or general assistance, right? Is it about money? Is it about, what is going on? And then how can those needs be met? But when we talk about a legal need, it's really about what is happening that can no longer be solved by one of those social resources, right? So perhaps a family filed for SNAP benefits, applied, right, to receive food assistance, and that was denied, or those benefits were cut. That is no longer a social need issue that can be solved through that social path. That needs to now be solved through a legal path, through a legal intervention with like an appeal to an administrative law judge, something like that. So that's sort of the difference in the kinds of things we're talking about. So in a community health setting, that might look like the simplest example I can give, and then there are many iterations. But imagine an individual has asthma. Their asthma can be treated by medication. They visit their doctor, receive medication to treat their asthma. However, they live in an apartment where black mold and other negative environmental factors are present, and their landlord will not fix those problems. Those problems cannot be solved, right? They cannot be healthy without having those problems solved within the place that they live. And so that requires a legal intervention, because that's now a landlord-tenant issue. Perhaps it is not being fixed because that is a person with a disability and they are being treated differently than other tenants within the property. That is also a fair housing issue, right? Because maybe that is happening because of who the person is, because of that protected class. And so that's when a legal intervention is required in order to get at the environmental factor that is ultimately causing the person to not be able to move toward optimizing their health. And so, just skip a couple here. So we're doing a lot of different kinds of work. We work with different, with these different community health partners. Sometimes that looks like individual referrals. That looks like I'll do a clinic with someone we receive a referral from, figuring out what's the legal issue, what's going on, how do we connect them with the right resources, the right legal assistance? Is that one of our agencies here that can assist? Is that someone else in the community? Is that a warm handoff? Is that it's an immigration issue, for example? Our organizations don't do immigration work, but we do have partners that do. So we can hand off those issues, get folks to where they need to be, connect them to those resources. Other situations we see are more systemic issues that come up. For example, I have a case example on the screen. So here, as the result of a referral that we received from one of our community health center partners, we're actually collaborating. So the DLC is collaborating with a private law firm to litigate claims of employment discrimination and unsafe working conditions in a specific industry with multiple plaintiffs. Because the community health center ultimately started seeing these patients who are primarily undocumented and or non-native English speakers who had developed these really long-term irreversible health conditions due to their exposure to an environmental factor. And so at their work, they had worked in the industry for many years and then developed these conditions that ultimately mean that they can't continue to work in the physical positions that they'd worked in for years, or maybe that they couldn't even work at all. And so we're seeing issues of, certainly disability is implicated here, right? These are disabling conditions. We're also seeing issues of ethnicity and national origin. We're seeing employment discrimination, right? We're seeing a number of things happening within these cases. And so then we figure out, well, how do we sort of go about that and how do we get at that issue? We're lucky enough to have one of our attorneys on staff is Spanish speaking, he's a native Spanish speaker. And so it's really amazing to be able to have him interacting directly with our clients in their native language, to be able, certainly we use an interpreter when necessary, but to be able to do that and have that is so incredibly important. So that's one example there. Another example, we do a lot of work around guardianship issues, sort of this idea around, oftentimes we see folks who, because of their disability, have their parents often have obtained guardianship of them once they reach the age of 18. We get a lot of reports about really egregious situations where folks are being neglected, their wishes are being ignored, or they're being controlled in a way that's inappropriate under the law. They're being forced or limited in ways that are disallowed under the law. We see things around like sterilization, being limited association with loved ones, those kinds of things. And so through the medical legal partnership, we're sort of navigating, how do we figure out how to get at this work, right? Because at the Disability Law Center, we don't work in the guardianship world as far as getting folks guardianships, because that really goes against our mission, right? But we do figure out, how can people be safe? How can they increase their autonomy? What does that look like? And so the partnership has allowed us to see more of those situations, right? For when providers are identifying concerns and issues that they're seeing from folks in practice, and we're able to sort of get in on those issues and figure out how to help folks navigate that so they can have more self-determination in their lives. And then finally, just a non-exhaustive list of some community partners. When I talk about those warm handoffs, these are super important to be able to connect folks to resources, to be able to go and do presentations to organizations, right? To be able to connect about the work and to talk about what we're doing, and to talk about, like, what is a medical legal partnership? How does it work? What are the resources? How do we talk about different kinds of rights that folks with disabilities have under the law? And so these partners are just some of those that we're able to engage on that work with. That is the end. Those are the ends of my slides. I'm happy to chat during our Q&A if anyone has questions about the work, but I'm excited for Sheri to talk about her voting work.
Good afternoon. As mentioned, my name is Sheri Newton. I've been an advocate with the Disability Law Center for most of my career and really enjoy that. My primary responsibility at the Disability Law Center over the last 13 years or so is to be the Voting Access Program Coordinator. And so I'm here to talk a little bit about some work we've been doing in the last couple of years with partners around Navajo Nation voting access. And so, yeah, if you want to just advance that, Katie. So here's if you're not familiar with the Navajo Nation, it's the largest reservation in the country. Here's a little bit look at the Four Corners area, and you can see just a kind of small geographic portion of that is in Utah. You'll go to the next one. And all of that is contained within San Juan County, Utah. And you can see that in this gray portion at the bottom is Navajo Nation land. And maybe go back a little bit for just a second, Katie. So if you haven't traveled Navajo Nation lands, and I think many of you have, you know, you can look at that and think, oh, that's just part of a county, but like areas like Navajo Mountain, you go well into Arizona a ways and then back up in to get there. So it's not a straight shot as you would think it would be. Okay, thank you, Katie. There are some challenges that voters on the Navajo Nation encounter, and those have to do with registration, language access, distance to voting, and accessibility. And we're going to kind of break those down and talk about who's doing what to address those challenges. The Rural Utah Project, which is recently converted to Stewardship Utah, they've joined with another organization, has been doing some exceptional work over the last few years around registration. Some of the barriers to registration for Navajo Nation citizens is the fact that they did not have an address in order to register to vote. They didn't have addresses. There's no cross streets. There's no names of streets there. And so the Rural Utah Project has done a great job of using Google Plus codes to give people an address. And so you can see here in this picture, one of the Rural Utah Project employees putting up, she's got her drill and she's putting up a sign on someone's home with the Google Plus code. Here's another picture of a gate to someone's home with the Google Plus code on that. That has been fantastic so that folks who have never voted before could get registered to vote, and then they of course receive their by mail ballot at a post office box, or they can go vote in person. What another really great advantage of that is people have encountered problems with their insurance in the past. Their insurance provider wouldn't cover a treatment or something because they didn't have an address. And so having those Google Plus addresses has helped with that. So great work by the Rural Utah Project in that venue. If you want to move to the next slide. Language access has also been difficult for people who read or speak Navajo. That was not provided in past years until the Navajo Nation Human Rights Commission and the ACLU of Utah sued San Juan County. And then there was a settlement agreement that came out in 2018 that requires that language access, that requires that there is early voting at chapter houses on Navajo Nation land available. They've been voting for a little while in San Juan County, like basically all through the month of October. There are opportunities to vote in person at chapter houses, just a few hours a day, once a week. And there are interpreters there. San Juan County hasn't complied consistently with all of the parts of that settlement agreement, but definitely there's been a movement forward, and those organizations meet regularly, even really weekly at this point, with San Juan County to address barriers to voting and language access, those kind of things. Okay, do the next slide. Voter engagement is something else. So the Rural Utah Project has done a really great job. They employ citizens there. Here's a great picture of someone who put up a free Navajo taco table during early voting in front of a chapter house, kind of drawing people in. Hey, you know, here's some food. by the way, did you know you could vote today right here? You know, and like some of that engagement work has been really great. Okay, next slide. And then of course, distance is an issue. And this is a little bit where the Disability Law Center has gotten involved. When you look at San Juan County, and in the past, they may have just had voting in Blanding or Monticello. That's a whole long ways from Navajo Mountain or Hannah. And what happens is on election day, the nation has their own elections for the nation's leaders. And if in the past, if people wanted to vote also on county and federal elections, they might have to go to their chapter house to vote for the nation's elections and then drive 50 miles to vote somewhere else for US elections, which just seems ridiculous. So, you know, these organizations that I mentioned, along with the Disability Law Center, has said, hey, let's get voting going at chapter houses on election day when we're already coming to a chapter house. So not just early voting, that's not good enough. Let's do it on election day. And one thing we heard from the county at some point is we can't do that because those chapter houses have Americans with Disabilities Act access issues. And you know, our answer was, you know, no. that we're not going there. So you can see a little bit from this chart, you know, if you're going from Aneth to Blanding, that would be 104-mile round trip. Or Red Mesa to Blanding, 150 miles. And they also have election day voting in Monument Valley, but you travel from Navajo Mountain to Monument Valley and back 220 miles. You know, we just find that fairly unacceptable. So the DLC has gotten involved and contributing our own expertise to kind of this. So if you go to the next slide. Our expertise is we understand accessibility and we understand how to overcome access barriers cheaply. We know we'll always give the cheap and easy solution where possible. So here's a picture of Red Mesa, this nice building, stucco building with some rock. It's got 2 entrances. It's got a gravel parking lot and, you know, a lift from the parking lot to the sidewalk. There's just a few things going on here. And so we traveled with the Navajo Nation Human Rights Commission around to all the chapter houses, did accessibility studies. Some of them are gorgeous, like they're new buildings, beautiful, very accessible. And we give some tips about, you know, you have this accessible building, remember, let's keep the hallways open, you know, let's have a 3-foot pass area, you know, some of those kind of suggestions. And if you'll go to the next slide, I'll give a few examples, like some of these buildings and what they look like. And in this lower left-hand corner, you can see a picture that we had included in one of the reports that we issued to the county saying, you know, here's where the access issues are. Here's some ways to overcome them. You know, so for example, in the lower left, that you can see a picture of that, a portion of that Red Mesa building. And we've drawn a graphic like, you don't have to pave the entire parking lot. Here's what we could do. Let's add some, let's put up an accessible parking sign right here. The car can be on gravel as long as the person can get out on concrete. Let's add some concrete in here. And this was the most intense of all the accessibility changes that needed to be made. Everything else, you know, you can see with these here in the middle, it's Montezuma Creek. Beautiful business building. It's pretty new. It's very accessible. They just need some signs and they need to mark the accessible parking. So there's accessible parking there. I mean, that's paint and a sign so, with an access aisle. So those are some of the suggestions that we have been giving. And the solutions are fairly simple, but the process to getting it done has not been, and we've been learning a lot about that. So if you'll go to the next slide. So we've also, besides just providing that accessibility expertise and suggestions, trying to connect these different entities. So of course you have the Navajo Nation chapter leaders and that chapter house, and they would have to be on board with any changes made there and supportive of that and agree to that. The second thing is somebody's got to pay for it, right? So we were able to reach out to the state of Utah and get them to commit to making those changes. We issued a ballot box accessibility report a few years ago where we looked at the ballot boxes all across Utah, which are now required to be in every town and reservation. And the statistics about how accessible our ballot boxes are were not great. So when the state came to me and said, you know, we want to work on this, where do we start? I said, let's start with the Navajo Nation. You got some money, let's start there. And so we've been able to get some funding there. The state was requiring that funding pass through the county to do the work. So this is like, these are new things that we thought we could be the pass through at first. As it turns out, the county would need to be the pass through. Okay, well, the county knows how to do things. If they could get permission to do the work, the county has their own work crew, right? They could just go, they get permission from the chapter houses, do the work with their work crew. No, they cannot, because they're not covered. Their insurance doesn't cover them on Navajo Nation land. So these are like some of the kind of things that we've been running into as barriers. And, you know, sometimes I just feel like, I've said a few times, my husband and I could have had this done 7 months ago in a weekend, you know, but that's not how it works. There are a lot of new things that I had to learn. And thank goodness I had the support of these other organizations, which I want to bring up, the Rural Utah Project and the ACLU of Utah. They have folks, those organizations have invested in employing people that live and work and understand the community. And those people have been generous enough to assist me in navigating, you know, these understanding the process, the culture, the structure of governments and how they interact. And that has just been invaluable. They've been generous in their forgiveness of me and their patience with me as I've learned that. And it's been just really exceptional. So just, if you'll go to the next slide. I want to cover a few things that I've learned along the way. I am no expert at this stuff. And I think has been critical, as I said, to find, if you're working with a new culture, a new system, find partners that can help you navigate. And they have just been really exceptional at doing that. And then they advised me, Melissa Eggy, who's the Indigenous Justice Coordinator with the ACLU. I met with her when I was kind of taking on this and to get her advice. And along the way, she's told me, you need to educate yourself. You know, don't ask people to educate you about them. Take the time to educate yourself about the culture and the system, and don't expect it to be spoon-fed, really. So she was really great with that. I've really learned to embrace opportunities to experience a different business culture. I was surprised when there's a group of a San Juan County voting coalition, which includes the ACLU, the Disability Law Center, Rural Utah Project, and the Navajo Nation Human Rights Commission. And we get together fairly frequently, you know, every other month or so, to talk about, you know, San Juan County voting, where we're going, how it's going, and each of us doing our part to increase access to voting there. And I was surprised when I saw the schedule the first few times that these meetings were scheduled for 3 hours. I thought 3 hours, you know, I was expecting an hour meeting, but those meetings have a very different culture, and it's been really fantastic to learn from that. Everyone in that meeting has their time to speak. It's a very different exchange. It's sort of like the back and forth, and, you know, you finding your moment to, you know, kind of pitch what you're thinking. Every individual has their turn, and they talk as long as they want to, and then it goes to the next person. And that has really helped with deepening understanding of where people are coming from. And really, in the end, that extra time saves time. I would say. And I really enjoyed that. My other thoughts as I was thinking about this is there may be icebergs is what that's the way I was thinking about it, as kind of explaining that this seemed like a really simple task. Oh, we'll just get money and somebody will do the work and it will be done. But there are a lot of levels of things that I didn't understand, of organizations that would need to be a part of it, and that would be supportive of that, and bringing different groups in, and just navigating really what was two governments, trying to work together, really like two nations. And so that's been great. And I've been so grateful when I have made those mistakes along the time. Like we had a really great meeting one morning, and at the end, we're enjoying. So we actually traveled to Navajo Nation headquarters, and we're down there together for our meeting, and we're enjoying some lunch together afterwards and just chatting. And I said something that was very common in my culture, but the whole room went silent. And I was like, I said something wrong. What did I do? And they were so kind to say, let us help you out, and gave me a 75-page thesis that someone had done on that topic about Navajo Nation and their attitudes. And it had to do with people's lives and their passing. And it was just so helpful. They gave me that. They forgave me right away. They were trying to be helpful. And I was able to read that later, and it opened my eyes to many more cultural aspects that I hadn't understood. So it's just really grateful for that. And then, the last thing is probably the first thing that Melissa Eggy told me. She said, just keep showing up. Keep showing up. There's a lot of folks and different organizations that come down here and want to fix or want to help. And she just said, show up and listen and just keep showing up. And that has just been a great privilege for me over the last couple of years to be able to do that. Thank you for the time that I've had to share that with you. Happy to take questions as well.
And I'll pitch in there with one thing. I think that I love these lessons, Sheri. I think that they're the tips and takeaways. I think they're so on point for all of the work that we do when we're working in new communities, and when we're expanding, thinking about collaboration, looking at new partnerships. The keep showing up piece, I think, is something that I've really seen in the medical legal partnership space as well. In that there are some folks who, I think, it's sort of that fatigue that I think that folks in the Navajo Nation were probably expressing, right? Folks are always coming down here, they're trying to help, and then they don't come back, or we're always sort of explaining what's going on, and that emotional labor is really hard and exhausting. And individuals and communities have to figure out, if that's what they want and need. And we've seen that in the sort of community health clinic space as well, right? When we're thinking about certain communities feeling kind of insular, and that's probably because those communities, people are always coming and being like, how can we help? What can we bring you? What can it look like? And then that suddenly disappears, and that can feel really exhausting. And so sort of that continuing to show up, showing that commitment, showing that you mean it, you're here, you're listening, you're learning. It's not about what we can bring to you necessarily, but what we want to learn, without making you do all the work. Like that informed not knowing you were talking about that Melissa sort of pointed out to you, I think is incredibly important. And then on our education team, I know we have a few education folks on the meeting, so I thought I'd point that out as well. Sort of some new work that we've just started engaging in this month is one of the attorneys on our education team, our special education team here at the DLC, took a trip down for the week to Southeast Utah and did 3 outreach events in partnership with the ACLU and with the Native American PNA. So there's actually a protection and advocacy agency that covers all of the like Native American territory spaces. And so in partnership with those 2 organizations, our special education attorney went down and did some really some listening sessions and some education around identifying issues legal issues within the special education work that's happening, both in the Navajo Nation and as well at one of the meeting houses. So
I think that really grew out of this keep showing up with voting thing, you know, like kept showing up and create these relationships. And then over time, folks are talking to me about more than voting. Like our post office access is terrible down here. And even our teachers, our special education teachers aren't sure what they should be doing. And our parents don't understand what they can ask for, what their child can have. And so I think establishing that trust in one area has really grown this opportunity for both of us.
yep, I think that's exactly right. Yeah. And yeah, we're happy to take questions, comments, things. I think we always have more to say, so we can say more things if there aren't questions, but definitely would love to engage with the audience.
Yeah, thank you guys so much. I'll just put out there, if anybody has a question, you're welcome to turn on your camera and your microphone and just chat with us. Or if you feel more comfortable, you can just put it in the chat, write out your question. But I've learned so many things listening to you guys. Thank you so much. There's so much that happens just unless you're involved in these types of programs, you have no idea what's going on, but behind the scenes, I guess, of society. So I really appreciate you guys sharing all the good work you're doing, all that you're helping so many people around our state with disability rights and with voting rights and so many important things. So yeah, if anybody has some questions, I don't know, Eduardo, if you have anything you'd like to say, or if anybody has a question, we have some time.
Yeah. Well, first of all, yeah, thank you for sharing so much information from the legal perspective that it is very critical for our society, especially for maximize the systems that are working and those systems that are out there. But I'm gonna ask from a sociological perspective that is a little bit my background, to get your thinking. Building communities is very important, and there are three main factors for building a community. First is the place, and we have the place, is the state of Utah. The second is the people, and we have the population that are living in Utah. But there is one piece that I always pay a lot of attention that I think is critical for building communities, and those are the interactions. How we interact each other, how we can be more effective in the conversations that we are having, especially with multicultural populations from very diverse backgrounds, how we can be effective where we are learning from each other. And Sheri, thank you for sharing those learning lessons of your program, where humility is very important, especially we want to have a long-term impact. But how we can maximize or be effective in the interactions that we have with diverse population. Any thoughts that?
Yeah. Sheri, I don't know if you have anything you want to chime in on there. I have a sort of a couple of, I think some things I think about a lot, Eduardo. I think in the work that in the medical legal partnership work, and in general in the work that I do here, and when we're engaging, particularly I think with anyone, but particularly when we're thinking about sort of this idea of culture, and we're thinking about I think in the disability world that looks even more diverse and interesting, right? Because then when we add in things like ASL, when we add in certain disability communities who have a really strong sense of culture, and then we overlay those, right, with when we're talking about ethnicity and culture, and there's sort of all of these really interesting layerings that happen And that's something I think about a lot, sort of thinking about what does it mean to have, for example, an interpreter if that's necessary to communicate, and how, what are the qualities that we want in an interpreter? Obviously, we want them to be qualified. We want them to be impartial. We want them, right? We want a number of things. We also want them to be able to connect with the person they're working with, so that that person trusts them and uses that, that interpreter as their voice, and vice versa. And that's, I think, one of the lessons I've really learned there, and the things that I really think about that I hadn't really, before the last few years, really thought about. What does it mean to have a trusted interpreter? How important is that? How important is it, particularly in communities where there may be a lot of distrust, or there may be concern, or there's been political or social unrest, or there are concerns about like government intervention, right? All kinds of things where, how do I know that the person that is on the other end of the phone, that I'm sharing these really sensitive and confidential pieces of information about my life, how do I know that I can trust them? And that's something that, sorry, my light, that's something that I've really started navigating and thinking about. And then how important is it to have someone that speaks your language and understands your cultural background, and maybe hasn't just learned the language and can provide interpretation, but has that lived experience, has that native learning. I feel like is really important. Those are my thoughts.
Thank you.
I'm really interested if anyone in the meeting has anything to add. I think that's a great question for everyone. I'm assuming you're offering, we're interested in anyone's feedback.
Hi, this is Rocio. I think like it's really hard in terms of trust. Sometimes you just have to accept that you may not be the right person to have certain conversations, because you have been part of the harm that's been done to a certain community, right? And sometimes that might be because you work for an institution or an organization that's done it. So maybe this was 20 years ago and you had nothing to do with it, right? But they may come and say, hey, it was the city, it was the state, it was the university, whomever it was, like that carries over, right? And I think it's just having the humility that sometimes you may not be the right person, and know when to step back and tap on to somebody else. And I think like Sheri was talking about earlier, how you need to have like these trusted partners around you as you're doing this kind of work, because sometimes it will be them that will be the right fit for certain conversations, for certain sharing of resources, right? And I think the other piece to this is just being transparent and being like, actually, I was not part of this. I don't know a lot about this initiative or this project. Here's this other person, or let me find out a little bit more before I can tell you more, right? And it's a lot of like that humility that kind of has to evolve constantly, where you're like, okay, I'm secure as a professional, but also I'm still not the right person for this. I'm still not the right person to do this. And also it kind of hurts a little bit, when you know that you're not the right person. So how do we learn how to manage our own feelings in those types of situations, so that the person that is vulnerable in that situation can just really say what they need to say, right? But it can be really hard too, because it requires a lot of like self-awareness of our own kind of like traumas and how we have experienced the world, but also like we're carrying an organization on our back, regardless of whether we haven't been involved in certain initiatives or not.
Know if anyone else has thoughts. Thought he might be coming on camera. Yes.
Hi there. Yes, I have some thoughts. Thank you. Thank you for this. Just like someone shared, I didn't know that this was happening unless I was aware of it. And with the Navajo Nations, it sounds very similar to things that have been happening in Hawaii as well. So when you talk about the collaboration and what they've done, you've learned from different cultures, indigenous cultures, and seen what they do. And what I do enjoy is seeing when the collaboration happens from different cultures, because I as well have made mistakes where everyone in the room has quieted down because I didn't know that I wasn't supposed to do something. So I am in that realm too when that happens. And I wasn't aware of that lawsuit that happened too, because currently what's going on in special education in West Valley City, we have a large Marshallese community, and in that Marshallese community, as well as being in Hawaii, knowing that that's the new immigration of communities that are coming in, is the Marshallese people. There is a demand for that translation, and we are, I think we might be the only school that has an in-house translator who we've worked with for years, and thankfully she has also built that the rapport with the community, where she comes in, and it has been the best. And I don't know how to speak Marshallese, but I've seen that happen. And I didn't know that that was happening in the Navajo Nations, because I just married into a family who they are 50% of the population in Blanding, and I did not know that. So I got to visit Blanding, and I can feel just being in there. There's something happening, and I understand that I sense the distrust, but I want to be a part of it. So my question was, where, because I have to travel there every year in the summertime to visit my in-laws, and how can I be a part of being a part of those kind of listening stories, if it's even possible, just to be in the room to hear those stories, because I was not aware, and I wasn't aware of what's happening, but you are doing the work. This needs to happen. So thank you for your work that you're doing, because it needs to happen. And I can see that accessibility is not there. The evaluation reports that you're talking about, this is all news to me, but I'm grateful that there's good work being put forward. And I'm more of a millennial, so social media is my thing. So I enjoy like Twitter, I mean X and Instagram, but following those type of volunteer projects helps me connect my followers to what's happening, especially if it could be close to home. So if anyone has those, I would love to follow that, to try to get into that part, just to help if I can, because I do see the need, and I am now married into that.
Well, that's really interesting, Dottie. Thank you for sharing that. I can see Sheri ruminating in her brain. She's thinking about connections, and she's thinking about some of that.
Oh yeah, I don't have a great answer, right, for the connections. Like that was, I found these organizations who are then, oh, you need to talk to the Utah Navajo Trust Fund. You need to talk, and they've just been, just so generous and like making those connections. We spent lots of time in open roads, just, Melissa Eggy of the ACLU has been like, okay, let me help you understand. We spent a whole day traveling and looking at post offices, I think she was thinking accessibility was a problem at post offices, and when we went out and looked, it didn't appear to be ADA accessibility as much as things like, how far is this post office from someone's home? Are they traveling 60 miles to get there? with the travel and you know, their access to fuel, the cost of fuel, how often can they really go to that post office? And then you only get one post office box for a family, for a residence, but there might be multi generations of a family living at that home. So you've got a box this big and it's supposed to handle the mail for, you know, really what is 3 or 4 families. And things like, if I'm really mad at my family member, I might not ever get them their mail. You know, like there are all these kind of things that were just very eye-opening as we spent this time, you know, traveling around, not only to just get the sense of the vast geography of the situation, but you know, all these barriers that maybe I can't do anything about, but they really increase my understanding of all the things that are connected to that, getting benefits and, you know, and all those kind of things. So yeah, that has been the best thing for me to hear people's stories, is to have someone that is known and trusted in the community and trusted me enough to hold my hand and take me there.
And I know we're just at the end of our time. I was going to say, Dottie, thank you also for your comments about the Marshallese community in West Valley City. That's I'm gonna go right now and do some learning, because that's I noticed you're a special education teacher, correct? And so I'm really interested in the intersection there and how we can here at the DLC we can be thinking about those topics and issues, and if there are challenges coming up. So thank you for pointing that out as well.
I'm gonna jump in. Thank you guys so much for such an awesome, eye-opening discussion. There's so much happening in our communities and really so much more that needs to happen. And I'm grateful for groups like this that we can talk about it. And I don't know, it makes me feel strengthened in the work that we're all doing. And I'm so grateful to see statewide. And even further, I think everybody today is from Utah, it seems. Actually, I'm not sure if everybody's from Utah. Sometimes we have some people join us from outside of the state too, and I love it because it makes me feel like there's so much work happening in Utah, outside of Utah, everywhere. There's work to be done. So thank you. I'm going to share a survey really quick. And if you could take a minute to fill that out before you get off the call. I know we're already 3 minutes over our time, so you don't have to take a lot of time to do it, but if you could please share your feedback in that way, that really helps us to know how we're doing as a program and improve as we are going. And it's helpful for our funding as well. So I'll get that out. And then Eduardo, if you have anything else to say before we end here.
Well, I just want to say thank you so much, Sheri. Thank you so much, Katie, and the Disability Law Center. I think that the legal system is so critical in the work that we are doing, and that is going to help us to work with the system and how to maximize the resources that uh, are there out there. I appreciate and I hope that you are gonna keep coming because I know there is so much that you wanna share and so much that we want to learn from. So again, thank you for being here and thank you for your willingness to work and learn together.
While you guys are filling that out, I'll just comment also talking about social media. I'm also in that group. So the Multicultural Disability Network, I live tweeted. I don't know if that's what it's called anymore because it's not Twitter, but I shared some updates from this meeting on our X account. And if you're on X and you want to join us there, we would love that. I also noticed the Disability Law Center is also there and active. So that would be a couple of places to start getting connected. I think we're both MoldiNet and Disability Law Center are on Facebook and Instagram. and LinkedIn as well. So if you're not already connected with us in those places, please connect with us there. And you'll likely be getting newsletters from us as well. So stay in touch, stay connected. We also have, just as a heads up, if you don't already know this, our website, we have all the recordings from our previous meetings saved there. So if you've missed meetings, you want to go back and learn something new, you can access them there, and as well as other educational content that we have there that's focusing on the intersectionality of disability and diversity. And we talk about a lot of different things there. So I think that's everything from me. So
in my culture, we said that if nobody wants to leave, it's because we still want to stay here. But we know how to contact you, Sheri and Katie. So we like you a lot. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Yes, thank you so much.
thanks, everybody. See ya.
Bye.